Assalamualaikum and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 36th ASM ideaXchange. I am your MC, Nazmi, wishing you good health and reminding you to stay safe and to always adhere to all COVID safety measures. We are joined today by our guests of honor. We have Yang Berbahagia, Professor Emerita Datuk Dr. Asma Ismail, President of the Academy of Sciences Malaysia, Yang Mulia Academician Tengku Datuk Dr. Muhammad Azman Sharifuddin, ASM Senior Fellow and Chairman of ASM's iConnect Steering Committee. Yang Berbahagia, Emeritus Professor Datuk Dr. Osman Bakar, Professor and holder of the Al-Ghazali Chair of Epistemology, Civilizational Studies and Renewal at IIUM's International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization. We also have Yang Berusaha Engineer Professor Dr. Ew Hong Tat, President and CEO of University Tunku Abdul Rahman, Malaysia. Yang Berusaha Professor Dr. Mahendran Sanggaran Nair, Pro Vice Chancellor of Research Engagement and Impact at Sunway University. Yang Berbahagia Professor Dr. Azizan Baharudin, Director of the Centre for Civilizational Dialogue, University Malaya, and UKM YSD Chair for Sustainability, as well as Yang Berusaha Puan Hazami Habib, CEO of the Academy of Sciences Malaysia. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. The ASM ideaXchange is a platform to discuss interdisciplinary matters and debate on science, technology, innovation, and economy issues. The 36th installment in this series will delve into how science and spirituality plays a part in achieving optimal planetary health. Members of the audience, today's ideaXchange is one of the programs organized under Minggu Sains Negara, brought to you by the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation, MOSTI. Today, we are witnessing a degradation of nature on a global scale at rates unprecedented in human history. The issue of deteriorating ecological health, evidenced by the wide-ranging threats of global warming, climate change, and the current pandemic, has gathered attention from many quarters in the world community. Addressing planetary health in a balanced and comprehensive manner is vital for humanity to fulfill its collective role as responsible custodians of the natural environment. Before we begin the forum, it is my pleasure to welcome Yang Berbahagia Professor Emerita Datuk Dr. Asma Ismail, President of the Academy of Sciences Malaysia, to deliver her welcoming remarks. Members of the audience, Dr. Asma.
Okay. Right. Boleh dengar? Am I allowed to speak now? Nazmi, boleh dengar ke?
Boleh, Datuk.
Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera. Distinguished moderator, academician Yang Mulia Tengku Datuk Dr. Muhammad Azman Sharifuddin, the Senior Fellow of the Academy of Sciences Malaysia, Scene Setter, Emeritus Professor Datuk Dr. Osman Bakar, Professor and holder of the Al-Ghazali Chair of Epistemology, Civilizational Studies and Renewal at ISTEC, International Islamic University, Malaysia. Our distinguished panelists, Professor Dr. Mahendran Sanggaran Nair, the Pro Vice Chancellor for Research Engagement and Impact at Sunway University, who's also a Fellow of the Academy of Sciences Malaysia. Professor Datuk Dr. Azizan Baharudin, the Director of Centre for Civilizational Dialogue at University Malaya and the UKM YSD Chair for Sustainability. Professor Engineer Dr. Ew Hong Tat, the President and CEO of University Tunku Abdul Rahman, Malaysia, and also Fellow of the Academy of Sciences Malaysia. Yang Berusaha Puan Hazami Habib, the ASM CEO, esteemed Senior Fellows and Fellows of the Academy of Sciences Malaysia, members of the ASM Expert Network, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the much-awaited event, our 36th ASM ideaXchange. And this time around, we will be discussing on an interesting topic, science and spirituality in pursuit of planetary health. Now, for the information of the fellows, I had just presented the topic on planetary health on behalf of the Academy to the High Tech Nation Council, which was very well received. And on April 7th of this year, the paper will be presented to the National Science Council chaired by the Prime Minister. So in the interim, while waiting for April 7, Yang Mulia Tengku had suggested to me to basically discuss on science and spirituality to see if we can add more meat to the paper on planetary health. Now, we had discussed this at EXCO, and further discussions were done to ensure that today's idea exchange now becomes a reality. Now we have, I have been informed that we have over 200 registered participants, including participants from Bangladesh, Philippines, and Singapore. So to all the participants, I welcome you to the idea exchange session today. Now I would like also to express my gratitude to Yang Mulia Tengku Azman for his willingness to be the moderator. And thank you also to Professor Emeritus Dato Osman Bakar as the scene setter, and to all the esteemed panelists for taking time off their busy schedule to sit down and actually enlighten us with their views on how science and spirituality are converging to address planetary health issues. Also, not forgetting members of the Academy and representatives of the scientific community. I welcome all of you, including government agencies, higher learning institutions, research institutes, industry stakeholders, NGOs, and individuals who have joined us today to participate in this intellectual discourse. Now, as you are aware, ASM has been organizing idea exchange sessions since 2011. So this is now more than 10 years that this event has successfully gathered the ASM expert network, the scientific community, the industry players, and society to actually sit down and discuss and have an intellectual discourse on interdisciplinary STIE, science, technology, innovation, and economy topical issues. And usually at this platform, it has generated many ideas and workable solutions, which has led to the development of position papers, policy papers, or concept papers by the Academy. Now, with regard to the team on planetary health, our environment, as you know, is changing. You may have experienced hotter days and more frequent heavy rainfalls. In less than 3 months, Malaysia experienced 3 major floods at central or peninsula, the east coast, and flash floods around Klang Valley, causing huge losses to the government as well as the rakyat. Now, in fact, for the past 40 years, we have experienced alarming proportion of zoonotic diseases as a result of human contact with animals like Nipah, MERS, and COVID-19. And all of these alarms are indicative of urgent needs to properly conserve, preserve, and manage our ecosystem, our biodiversity, human and animal health, as well as to address climate change in an integrated manner as reflected through the planetary health parameters. Now, as Malaysia progresses towards a developed nation status, it must ensure that the nation's prosperity is built upon environmental sustainability, couple that with social equity and inclusion, so that no one is left behind. Now, if we do not do anything about planetary health, we probably would face exponential economic shocks, societal collapse, and environmental degradation. And the continued negligence that we all see and failure to address planetary health will result in us all falling to an even bigger economic shock due to the emerging diseases, especially zoonotic origin, floods, landslides, and so forth. So, ladies and gentlemen, after all that I have said just now, the topic for discussion today is a timely one. As you know, we are entering the Anthropocene, a new geological period in which humans have now become a force of nature, creating massive and rapid global ecological changes. It's not about the knowledge in science or technology that we lack to mitigate planetary health issues. I mean, we have known about most of the problems for decades, and we even know the technological solutions needed. Our effect on climate change, encroachment on wildlife habitats via environmental degradation have gotten from bad to worse. Now, COVID-19 has also shown that the zoonotic diseases are becoming riskier to humans based on our own actions. So if failure to act on what we know is not a failure of science and technology, then the solution must lie beyond the realm of these natural sciences. The challenges as we see it and the solutions are very human. Mahatma Gandhi had stated, if both science and spirituality go hand in hand, then one can create heaven on the holy earth. So let us hear where the discussion today will lead us on this very interesting topic. Is Mahatma Gandhi right to say that science and spirituality should go hand in hand, like two sides of the same coin, so to speak? Or are we saying that science and spirituality are totally opposite fields with regard to providing solutions to planetary health? So it is our honor to have Datuk Tengku Azman, Emeritus Professor Datuk Osman, Professor Dr. Mahendran, and Professor Datuk Azizan and Professor Dr. Yu with us today to express their views. And I believe that members of the audience are looking forward to listen to their views and also being given the opportunity to ask questions about the topic itself. So as such, I foresee an interesting and insightful discussion today, and I would like to urge everyone to actively participate in the discussion later. Last but not least, thank you once again to the ASM management team in organizing the 36th ideaXchange, and thank you to the audience for making time to participate in this session. Let's all pray for a fruitful discussion and of course, stay safe, everyone. Sekian wabillahi taufiq wa hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Back to you, with me.
Thank you, Dr. Asma, for the warm welcome and insightful opening for today's idea exchange. Members of the audience, once again, I would like to remind Zoom viewers to type your questions and comments in the Q&A box provided. To our Facebook viewers, you may type your burning questions in the comment section. Thank you. Members of the audience, to preface the forum today, allow me to introduce our esteemed moderator, scene setter, and panelists. Our moderator for today is Yang Mulia Academician Tengku Datuk Dr. Muhammad Azman Sharifuddin, ASM Senior Fellow and Chairman of ASM's iConnect Steering Committee. He served as Founding Director General and CEO of the Malaysian Institute of Microelectronic Systems, or MIMOS, for over 20 years and was instrumental in catalyzing the formulation and implementation of national ICT policies and strategies, such as the Multimedia Super Corridor and the National IT Agenda. He also has a lifetime interest in the history and philosophy of science and technology. Emeritus Professor Dr. Osman Bakar will be the scene-setting presenter for today. He is a professor and holder of the Al-Ghazali Chair of Epistemology, Civilizational Studies and Renewal at IIUM's International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization. Dr. Osman was listed as Malaysia's 20 leading intellectuals and is one of the 500 most influential Muslims in the world. He is renowned for his writings, particularly on Islamic philosophy and science, Islam in Southeast Asia, and intercultural dialogues. He was a member of the Council of 100 Leaders of the West Islamic World Initiative for Dialogue, established by the World Economic Forum. He has served as an advisor and consultant to various entities, including UNESCO and the Patara Foundation. Next, we have our panelist, Professor Dr. Mahendran Sangharanayar, Pro Vice Chancellor of Research Engagement and Impact at Sunway University. Professor Dr. Mahendran is the architect for the development of the 1010 MySTIE framework and the 8I STIE ecosystem model. Both frameworks have been used extensively by government agencies, industry, and community organizations for strategic decision-making. His research works have been published in leading international journals. He was acknowledged as one of the 100 most inspirational LinkedIn icons in Malaysia for 2019. Our next presenter is Professor Dr. Azizan Baharuddin, Director of Centre for Civilizational Dialogue, University Malaya, and UKM YSD Chair for Sustainability. Dr. Azizan is the former Director General of the Institute of Islamic Understanding Malaysia, or IKIM, and winner of the Langkawi Award 2016. She was a lead member of the drafting team for the Islamic Declaration on Global Climate Change, which was endorsed by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. She specializes in several areas such as environmental ethics, religion and sustainable development, Islam and science, bioethics, interfaith and intercivilizational dialogue. Rounding up our panel is Engineer Professor Dr. Ew Hong Tat, President and CEO of University Tunku Abdul Rahman, Malaysia. Engineer Professor Dr. Ew's research interest is in microwave remote sensing, satellite image processing, wireless sensor network, and intelligent computing. He has won numerous scientific awards, including the Young Scientist Award of the International Union of Radio Science and the Torre Science and Technology Award by the Malaysian Torre Science Foundation. Apart from being a scientist, Professor Ew is active in Buddhist activities. He has authored a book titled Universe, Particles, and Life that encompasses science, Buddhism, and life. Members of the audience, now that you have been acquainted with our moderator and presenters, let us welcome Yang Mulia Academician Tengku Datuk Dr. Muhammad Azman Sharifuddin to commence the forum. Tengku Datuk Dr. Azman, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Nazmi. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Yang berbahagia Profesor Emerita Datuk Dr. Asma, President of ASM. Yang berbahagia Emeritus Professor Datuk Dr. Osman Bakar of ISTEC. Professor Dr. Mahendran Sanggaran Naya of Sunway, Professor Datuk Azizan Baharudin of last but not least, Professor Ew Hong Tat of University Tunku Abdul Rahman, Malaysia. Yang berusaha Puan Hazami, CEO of ASM, esteemed fellows, senior fellows and fellows of the Academy, members of the ASM Expert Network, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum and a very good afternoon to all. It's a great pleasure and honor to moderate this session, which we all believe is a very important one. The President has just indicated how badly we are managing the Earth and our planet. So I would like to use a few minutes to set the context for this discussion by telling a little story, very short story on man's dealing with nature. Of course, science and scientists go through constant change. It's a very dynamic field with very dynamic people. So nothing is in concrete. Science is knowledge, and most of us think of science as understanding how nature works. Its companion is technology, which is how to make good use of nature's resources. And dealing with how also is economics, the economics of supply and demand, which makes several assumptions, sometimes based on scientific knowledge. And these assumptions may not be stated, but it is inherent in the way that economics is being framed right now. For example, nature's resources are practically limitless. Another one is nature can regulate itself. And the third one is science can reverse any damage that we make on nature. And I think we are beginning to see that many of these assumptions are actually incorrect. What about the industrial civilization that we have built? It is basically a utilitarian value of nature. We assume that human ingenuity can create technologies that can sustain a materialistic lifestyle. The worldview is fairly old-fashioned. We can call it based on Newtonian dynamics, a very linear model, very deterministic, and of course reversible. Whatever mistakes you make, you can reverse the mistake. Of course, this worldview also includes unlimited growth. So I would like to quote from two books. It happens that this year is the 50th anniversary of this book, Limits to Growth. This book was published in 1972, At that time, Nature, I have Nature's editorial of 17 March, 5 days ago. Nature actually called the book Another Whiff of Doomsday. 50 years on, Nature in 2022 is saying that it's time to end the debate. The world is running out of time. So Nature is swallowing its previous position on the limits to growth. There are limits. And the scientists who believed at that time, 50 years ago, that everything we do can be reversed, can be corrected, are being proven wrong. I want to also quote from another book to indicate how complex nature is. This is Capra's book, The Web of Life, published 25 years ago or so. And Capra, to me, he's a physicist, particle physicist, who went into philosophical and spiritual ideas. When he speaks about the web of life, he is actually promoting deep ecology. And he defines deep ecology as man being integrated within nature, not sitting above nature. Not above nature, it's with nature. And of course, he looks at deep ecology as a system, an integrated, interconnected system, an interdependent network. And he promotes also new values. I want to just mention one. The self-assertive value that we seem to have now should be replaced with the integrative worldview. So these are very interesting developments that are not new. They have been there, but they have been ignored and neglected. But the crisis is looming before us. We should look into these ideas and reframe the conceptual framework for science and technology. So what we have today is a way to look at this integrative means of looking at man's role in nature and within nature. So we have four speakers, with one speaker to set the scene and three additional speakers to expand on some of the basic ideas that we need to delve into. So let me, with pleasure, welcome our scene setter, Professor Osman Bakar, who will spend about 20 minutes to give his views. Welcome.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum. Hello, can you hear?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, thank you. Assalamualaikum, selamat petang dan good afternoon. Yang berbahagia Profesor Dr. Asma, President of the Academy of Science Malaysia, Puan Hazami, CEO of ASM, yang dihormati yang berbahagia Dr. Tengku Azman, Akademisi Tengku Azman, the moderator of this program, distinguished panelists, and the distinguished ASM ESCO distinguished participants. Thank you very much for inviting me to be a speaker at this program today. We meet today in order to discuss a very important issue, namely the issue of possible meeting points or points of convergence between science and spirituality, particularly on the subject of planetary health. Now, in modern times, this issue has been discussed by many individuals and groups. In the next few minutes of my presentation, I've prepared some slides. I just would like to go through an overview of humanity's evolving consciousness of planetary health. And in the last 50 years, I say, Dr. Tengku Azman referred already to the book, The Limits of Growth, celebrating 50th anniversary. but I have to go a few years earlier. So I would like to start with a very, very important book that influenced the limits to growth itself. And basically, I would like to highlight some of these important events in the last 50 years regarding the humanity's consciousness of planetary health. All right, can we go to the slides, please? Next, please. Yes. Now, let me take you to this book. I think the most impact, the major work, the first major work that was published. The title is The Encounter of Man and Nature, and the subtitle, The Spiritual Crisis of Modern Man. It was published exactly on January 1st, 1968, by a prominent scholar of Islam, Syed Hossein Nasr, who was a physicist, trained in physics at MIT, with a PhD from Harvard. And the book itself came out of a very significant event. In the 1960s, the University of Chicago organized a series of lectures. And in the 1960 lecture, Syed Nasr was invited to talk on the theme of problems posed for peace and human life by various applications of modern science. And significantly, the organizers, the Divinity School, Department of Biological Sciences, and Center of Middle Eastern Studies of the university, which is a center of interdisciplinary studies. So to see that combination of theology, science, and philosophy is a very significant event. That was more than 50 years ago. And it was sponsored by the Rockefeller Foundation. Now, this work is the first cross-cultural treatment of the natural environment, and it predicted a global ecological crisis. Of course, later, the book was translated many languages of the world, had impact on academics, scholars, thinkers, think tanks, policymakers. And I'll come back to this book later. Okay, next slide, please. Yes, the first impact of that book, of Nasr's book, was precisely limits to growth. And many of the themes that were discussed by Nasr in Man and Nature were brought up by the founders of the Limits to Growth, is the Club of Rome. Since Dr. Tengku Azman has already mentioned about this, I don't want to waste time here, but I just want to quote here. It is very relevant to our discussion today. The message, the core message of the book. Man can create a society in which he can live indefinitely on earth if that, very, very big ifs. If, number one, he imposes limits on himself. And number two, he imposes limits on the production of material goods. Well, in my own mind, those two things have not been realized. Man has not proved himself able to impose limit on himself, and the production of material goods continues on and on. So I think that's the main message for us to take into account. Next slide, please. Yes, in the same year, published in 1972, in fact, Nasr's book had an influence on the UN Conference on the Human Environment at Stockholm in 1972. So it is out of that conference that a book entitled "Only One Earth." That is the main title of the book, "Only One Earth," and the subtitle, "The Care and Maintenance of a Small Planet." It's a small planet. Now, this was the first attempt to study the environment on a global scale, and the authors of the book, Barbara Ward and René Dubos. And this is an unofficial report, although sponsored by the United Nations. But I would like to draw attention to the content of this book. It was a profoundly ethical, value-oriented, emphasize value-oriented study, given the fact that we tend to separate between values and what is considered as facts. All right, so well, I read the book, went to South and the book, but also read the Indonesian translation in 1974. It was called Hanya Satu Bumi. Okay, all right, next slide, please. Yes, the next important event, of course, the celebrated Rio Summit and in Brazil, and the, well, at least in terms of documents that came out of that Rio thing, we have the Rio Declaration on Environment and Development, which was affirmed by the United Nations General Assembly in New York. But the significance of that summit was what amounted to an international environmental treaty to combat dangerous human interference with the climate system. And we know very well that the interference is continuing until today. All right. Next slide, please. Yes, in 2015, this book came out, actually, to be precise, in July 2015, just before the United Nations adopted the 17 SDGs. Before that, just a few months, this came out of the Vatican. The Vatican had its own standpoint on the ecological concern. I put here 5 important issues that were central to the Vatican. Of course, from the Catholic perspective, the current state of our common home, the gospel message as seen through creation, the human causes of the ecological crisis, and the issue of ecology and the common good. The title here is Laudato Si, on the care of our common home. So the theme of the planet Earth as our common home is emphasized here by His Holiness Pope Francis. All right, the next one, please. Next slide. So, yeah, just reproduce here a slide about this, the 2015 UN General Assembly resolution. I know in Malaysia today, for example, my own university, the Asmat University, Islamic University of Malaysia, spends a lot of efforts on the 17 SDGs, you know? And also not only that, precisely because these 17 SDGs do not deal with the spiritual dimension. So IIN takes the initiative to look at how the input of spirituality can be organized as far as SDGs are concerned. All right, next one. Slides, please. All right, now I come to the real issue, our discussion today, basically a science-spirituality partnership in the pursuit of planetary health. I want to come back to NASA's book to revisit, precisely because the book is very much relevant today, still until today, and it's relevant to the theme of our discussion today. So I want to revisit some of some of the main conclusions of that, and I put there this a book which just come out, Malaysia dan Alam Tabi'i, Kemelut Rohani Manusia Modern, Syed Hossein Nasar. The Malay translation, the first Malay translation of the book just came out a few weeks ago. And okay, let me summarize the important points in this book that I think we should pursue. First, ecological crisis is an externalization of a spiritual crisis in modern man. 2, rediscovering the traditional cosmologies of the Oriental tradition as a means of gaining a new vision of nature. Number 3, re-emphasizing the spiritual value of nature. 4, restoring the balanced relationship between man and nature. And 5th, rediscovering traditional metaphysics as the theory of relativity, which is at once spiritual and rational, and its relationship with science. So I use these points as a kind of a intellectual background, a conceptual background for me to come up with certain proposals that we can discuss here today and later on, and on other occasions, inshallah. I have 10 proposals which I would like to address. Okay, thank you. Next, please. All right. The science spirituality partnership in the pursuit of planetary health proposal. The image in the slides, my latest book, Environmental Wisdom for Planet Earth, the Islamic Heritage. Of course, most of the points, proposals that I'm now presenting are contained in the book. First, the first proposal. I think we need to establish a common ground between Malaysia's spiritual tradition, especially the cosmological and psychological dimension. My argument here is that Malaysia's tradition, spiritual tradition, all the major ones in the world are in our country. And there is a common ground, actually, if we look at the literature on the cosmology and psychology and even ecology to be found in different religious traditions. I think we need to do that. Now, having established a common ground between our spiritual traditions, we need to establish a common ground between science and spirituality in the study of nature and planetary health. In a sense, we are doing today what we're doing today. We jump one step because we really have not discussed to find a common ground between the various traditions. Okay, the third proposal, to understand the complementary role of science and spirituality in ensuring planetary health. Science and spirituality can go their own ways, in parallel, but there is an overlapping also. Yeah. So basically, I have started the complementary one. In other words, each is strong in its own area. Science has its solution, spirituality has its solution, but besides the complementary one, there is also the what they call this the common one. Okay, the fourth proposal is to broaden the concept of ecology to include biophysical and human ecology and their spiritual dimension, introducing the concept of integral ecology. I think this is important concept that we need to pursue. We need to discuss. And the next one is enhancing mutual understanding between science and spirituality viewed as different paths to knowledge. There's no doubt that there are differences. Both are interested in attaining knowledge, but the scientific path is not the same as the spiritual path. But that's something that is common as well. The next one is understanding the role of spiritual ethics in the application of science and technology. I distinguish between spiritual ethics and just simply ethics because I think it is not the same. Right? In other words, there is an ethics that is based on spirituality that, of course, are important for the scientific community as well. Okay, next slide, please. Now, understanding the scientific and spiritual dimension of the United Nations 17 SDGs, I think that is a good document for us. It's a good agenda to try where scientists and people of spirituality can discuss how the 17 SDGs can be pursued on both scientific and spiritual basis. The next one is enhancing the ethical role of scientists and technologies in the maintenance of planetary health. Again, question of ethics. What I mean here, that perhaps the voice of scientists in the area of ethics should be more pronounced than today, and not just simply to produce knowledge, but also to ensure that scientific knowledge will be used in a good, in a beneficial way to humanity. And next one is understanding science and spirituality as sources of mutual empowerment. This is very, very important. I think to come to this kind of realization, science is a source of empowerment also for spirituality and vice versa. In other words, the two are not viewed as contradictory, but rather as enforcing each other. And finally, as I discussed in my book, ecological ideas in the Quran, I think the other panelists talking about from their own tradition. But as far as ecological ideas in the Quran, I've listed here 8 ideas. 8 ideas, 8 ecological ideas in the Quran. I can only list here. I don't have time to go into detail. First, the earth as man's ideal planetary home. In other words, that is quite explicit in the Quran, that the earth is man's ideal planetary home. Number 2, man as trustee and guardian of the earth. Number 3, the uniqueness of the earth as a life-supporting planet. 4, interrelatedness and interdependence of life in the cosmos. 5, all animal species are communities like you, ummah like you. 6, balance and equilibrium in nature. 7, no waste in nature. 8, harmony between nature and culture. Okay, next one, next slide. I want to show that I was part of the team that organized the Islam Buddhism Eco Dialogue. The theme of our major conference, international conference with the Dalai Lama, was precisely that there is a common ground between Islam and Buddhism as far as ecological ideas are concerned. Thank you very much. My presentation.
It's a very broad sweep, and I find the most interesting part for me, at least, is his proposal. But let's keep that for time being. Let's invite the next speaker. Let's have now Professor Mahindran. Sorry, Professor Azizan, I think. That's the next speaker. Azizan, are you ready?
I think it should be Professor Mahindran, but it's okay if everyone agrees.
Yeah, so correct. Okay, yeah. So I'm getting confused at least. So would you like to give way to Professor Mahindran, or you want to continue?
Yes, I think Professor Mahindran's adrenaline probably is
okay.
Maximum.
Sure, I'm open.
Yeah. Okay. So let me follow the sequence as in the list. So yeah.
Yeah.
So let's have Professor Mahindran then.
Okay. Can I share my slides?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have it. Okay. Please proceed.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Selamat petang, Prof. Asma, Tengku Azman, Wan Hazami, and Prof. Osman for an eloquent, overview. Fellows of ASM, fellow panel members, ladies and gentlemen. Let me take this opportunity to thank ASM for inviting me to share some thoughts on how I see this topic from an economist perspective. So the topic that I'll cover is science, spirituality, planetary health, values-based development and competitiveness. No, there's not a typo of value, it's values-based. And I'm going to touch about, how we see the world from a spiritual perspective. I think Prof. Osman touched on some of the spiritual aspect. Here are some of the elements of spirituality and planetary health. Clearly, I think Islam has spoken about the role of the environment and man. We also see in Christianity, in Buddhism, in Hinduism, and also the native within the, across the globe, has also seen nature. And I really like this quote, which is really profound. It says that we do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. So it's more forward-looking. And I thought it was really profound in terms of, where we stand in terms of the environment and development. I just want to move now to what is the cost so far in terms of economic development and development over the last many years. And this is the environmental cost that we see that has had a major impact on Malaysia. We see that over the last 24 years, we've grown rapidly. Economic development, we were the roaring tiger economy during the 95 to, the later part of 2000. But on the back of that, we see that our environment has really paid a price. And here are some of the numbers. Over the last 24 years, environmental related cost is close to 7.8 billion. The welfare cost of environment, particularly premature death, is about close to $1 trillion. The cost of environmental related costs is close to 3% of the GDP. We haven't even taken into account the floods, the recent floods. And we did a projection to see where we are if it's status quo. The cost could go up to close to 200 billion by 2035. So we really do have a major issue that we need to address. Now, coming back to the topic of today, which is science and spirituality, science and development, we clearly need to look at how do we bring spirituality, science, and planetary health together. And here is a framework that we were looking at. As I mentioned, values-based development, and we have a framework that tries to bring everything together. And what we distill is that if we look at all the religions, there are some common spiritual values and truths. I think all spiritual, all religious, systems talk about harmony with nature, human and animal rights, being a more humane and caring society. And these are some of the common universal values that is embedded in all the religions. But sometimes it's very nebulous, and we haven't translated that into really practice. How do we distill the core values? And this is where we really need to work hard as scientists, as social scientists, to tease out the core values. And clearly, I think we need to have a mindset change on how we see religion, science, and also our environment. And one of the key things is that mindset change must touch the heart. If it doesn't touch the heart and inspire people, then you see that people will gravitate towards the basic minimum of life, and this notion of profit maximization as opposed to purpose maximization. So we see that we need to tease out these core values from these spiritual truths, the universal spiritual truths. And we need to embed into some universal values. And Prof. Osman talked about the UN Sustainable Development Goals. That's a common goal that has been agreed upon by the global community. And what we did was that we looked at the common goals and built that core values that was embedded in the spiritual truths. Things such as respect for environment, people, animals. We got to rethink of how we see economic development. We need to reduce, we need to reuse things more appropriately. The notion of recycling, restoring, places where we have actually had major adverse impact. We need to start restoring the environment before it's too late, and repurposing the things, the assets that we have, which is our environment, the people, the planet. How do we repurpose this? We started working on this over the last 2 years in terms of UN Sustainable Development Goals, trying to embed that spiritual values. And more recently, we started looking at planetary health more closely, and these universal values can be brought down to the core values of planetary health. We looked at, when we had two major studies that looked at what we call the 8R nature-centric philosophy. And we were also fortunate to be able to work on oceans, and a minor tweak of the 8R philosophy, the mindset change. We were able to build that 8R philosophy. This is the mindset change that is needed. That is, we think there are gaps that can be translated from the spiritual values to core values that could be embedded in our way of life. So we see that the core values are really important, but more importantly, how do we do the how? And how do we create that ecosystem, that integration with the things that we live day to day? This is our material world. So embedding that spiritual values, the core values in our material way of life. We have to look at our infrastructure. I'll talk about, what do we mean by infrastructure? Here is a kind of a more detailed analysis of how we build that core values of ensuring the infrastructure, harnessing our natural infrastructure, but also our physical infrastructure, building that 8R philosophy, using the digital technology to be able to enhance strategic decision-making, this 8R philosophy, talent development, this communication, education, public awareness is critical to get that message across in all our religious institutions, organizations, scientific schools, and so on. Integrity systems. Integrity is really important. This is integrity that is anchored on that 8R philosophy. Incentives to incentivize people to do the right thing, and the institutions, the institutions play a key role in leading it, from religious institutions, government, in our case, federal, state, municipality, right up to the institutions of the family. And these all need to play a role in terms of the strategic partnership and linkages. And the last one is essentially, we are not a country on our own, we are an open economy. And we are starting to see that environment is going to be an important non-tariff barrier. So we need to be able to adhere to those global best practices, but it has to be natural. And this is where the 8R philosophy is critical, seamlessly integrate into the way. So impacting, addressing global best practices in supply chain. And Malaysia has done really well in terms of now building under the 12th Malaysia Plan, a framework that brings science technology to address the socioeconomic drivers from addressing the nature-based solution and an ecosystem approach. So under the 12th Malaysia Plan, we're starting to bring this together. So coming back to our story, so we see that the spiritual values need to be teased out in terms of core values that we can synthesize and build an ecosystem around to be able to operationalize that and be able to assess the impact on our environment. So we have all the scientific tools and technology to monitor our taseks and our rivers and our lakes, and our environment. We ought to use that, and this is where science plays a key role, and how that impacts social, people's health and well-being, the economy, and political dimension. So it's an important dimension. If the political stability is not there, we see that all this will unravel. So clearly, we need to be able to assess how the ecosystem has an impact on these 4 dimensions. And more importantly, assess what we call not return on investment, but return on value. So we see that if we take a status quo approach, we'll see that our return on value will taper down. But we've got adequate empirical evidence, which I'll show, that if we harness this ecosystem, which is nature-centric, our return on value goes up. And this is where it is really important. And reinvesting that resources back to enhancing our value system, and this is where we see the sustainable development is really critical. And this is anchored on our science, technology, innovation policy that is already embedded, that integrates the technology, the STIE, with the socioeconomic drivers, which covers, economic, politics, social, and environment. So again, that integration is really important. I'll show you an example of how this can be done. This is the how to how. And we're doing some work on the coastal communities, and we clearly see that there are major challenges in these communities. High incidence of poverty and social problems, unsustainable practices, overfishing, pollution, climate change. They're going to be the frontliners of climate change. And I think across the globe, and including in Malaysia, we also see that this sector has got tremendous potential, but it's not competitive. And we have a major problem on food security. Clearly, we see that there are socioeconomic issues, but how do we use that spiritual core values to move them up the value chain? And this is where a systemic approach, in each of those localities is critical to drive change. And this is how if we put this in place, we see that we're able to transform these communities that are, operating at the margin to become mainstream, becoming vibrant, sustainable economic localities and zones. We've done the mapping across Malaysia for a study on blue economy, and we see the coastal communities, not just fishing, but across the globe, and they are operating at a low optimum level, many of them. And how do we incorporate this science, technology kind of mindset? And we see that if we put that systems approach in place, we can actually bloom each of those communities to become sustainable, vibrant, dynamic communities that could lead the way for the country. And here are some of the examples that we show. If we did this over the next 10 years, what would Malaysia look like, these coastal communities? By the way, this could be done across every community. So we see that a values-based development agenda can be done if we followed a systems approach in a systematic way to transform every community. It has to come from the 30,000 feet right up to the ground. And we showed some modeling estimation that showed that this community, this blue economy, is about $61 billion. And if we just did status quo, very little growth. But if we put in the spiritual, scientific value system, that planetary health, the 8R and 8I ecosystem framework, these communities could play a key role in driving socioeconomic agenda for Malaysia, raising the value, what I call return on value, the wealth, to close to about $500 billion over the next 10 years. That can only happen if we adapt a systems approach. We also show that if we do not adhere to the planetary health issues, Malaysia's competitiveness will go down. And if we adopt a more systematic approach to addressing planetary issues, planetary health issues and sustainable development, which spawn new industries that will create new high-income jobs, the potential for raising Malaysia's global competitiveness. So we see that there's a strong link between planetary health, sustainable development, spiritual values, and competitiveness. So to summarize, we see that, there is a strong nexus between spirituality, science and technology, planetary health. But there are 6 steps. One is to really understand the core spiritual values, tease out those values into something that is operational, which is embedding that in every facet of our lives and using an ecosystem and integrated approach, and continuously assessing that impact to our environment, economy, social, and also political empowerment. And as we create value, reinvesting it back. And this is what we see as sustainable development. I just want to finish off with a very important reminder that I thought was really profound. Only when the last tree has died and the last river has been poisoned and the last fish has been caught, we will realize that we cannot eat money. It's not just return on investment. We've got to start thinking about return on value, a values-based approach where anchored on our spiritual values. Thank my team for working with me on this. And terima kasih. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mahendran. Coming from 40,000 feet of Professor Osman, you actually brought it down to the ground. Thank you. There are many questions, I'm sure. I have my own question, but let's leave it for now. Let's really have now Professor Dato' Azizan. This time it's your turn, Azizan.
Yes, thank you so much. Yang berbahagia Profesor Emerita Datuk Dr. Asma, Yang Mulia Academician Tengku Datuk Dr. Muhammad Azman, Emeritus Professor Datuk Osman, fellow panelists, Puan Hazami, Habib, not to forget our Master of Ceremony, distinguished guests and fellows of the Academy. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And a very good afternoon. Thank you very much for allowing me, giving me the opportunity to share with you some ideas on the topic. I think the presentations by Prof. Osman and Prof. Mahendran has really opened the window as to what can be the scenario after this Yang Mulia Tengku. So what I will be doing is just to add on to add a little bit more meat here and there. And especially I'm coming from the background of civilizational dialogue, having had some experiences with colleagues from different faith groups, vis-a-vis planetary health, environmental ethics, and also the experience of curiously trying to empiricize religious knowledge and spiritualizing scientific knowledge. I say that with great caution, but I think what is needed, as Prof. Mahindran and Prof. Osman has already explained to us, the values need to be teased out. And for the Muslims, the word is tadabbur. You have the kitab, you have the Quran, you have the revelation, right? But we hardly ponder and we hardly put together the meaning of what the Quran is saying by looking at nature, which is a job of science. So basically, we support the great importance of the topic, and we hope that by Academy playing the role that it is doing today, the voices will not be silenced. I don't mean to be cynical there, but up till now, I think groups and people and academics and scientists, of various faith groups, they have not been able to have that platform that is looked upon in a healthy way by fellow academics when they want to put science and religion together. So I think this session that we have today is extremely important. I think we are talking about criticizing the view that looks purely at mitigation. Here I mean perhaps the very well-meaning efforts that everybody puts in whenever a disaster occurs. We talk about mitigation and mitigation and mitigation. You look at the media, what the media sort of shares with us is mitigation, yeah. But we hardly speak about the causes and the effects of climate change. So we badly need increase in literacy of the climate problems. And then this is very much linked to science literacy. We really have to be serious about people understanding what is going on, especially when they look at changes in the environment. And for this, when you bring science and religion together, there is a dire need for new narratives. We need to be able to speak about, like what Prof. Mahindran has exposed to us just now in the economic sphere, and also Dr. Osman before that, the new way of talking about what Revelation says, the source of values is saying, is actually really happening out there. So we need holistic approaches. You don't need to say that. So then very, very briefly in the whatever time we have, we can start talking about what can be done. So this coming from the religious dimension, faith dimension, perhaps you cannot simply believe, you have to translate your beliefs, your values into action. And this is I think you spoke before this about the how of the how. Yang Mulia Tengku spoke about the how, you give that question. So that question is very pertinent. Next. Okay, this is for those scientists especially, who and also the religious people who think that when you speak about religion having a very important role in providing pro-environmental behavior, in expanding pro-environmental behavior, they might think that this is just a far-fetched notion. No, we're saying that in the past 10 years, 20 years, since early 2000s, there has been serious studies done by scientists and also social scientists that actually say to us that religious teachings, religious leaders, religious groups can actually effect changes on the ground. Next. Researchers as early as 2007, for example, like Paula J. Posses, have actually shown to us the pivotal role of religion in issues of climate change, environmental justice, which hinge primarily on religious functions in society, ethical teachings, reach and influence, and ability to inspire adherence to action. Religion's ability to inspire action is evaluated empirically against data from whoever is being studied, from two compilations of religious activity on climate change. The materials, the analysis indicates that there has to be a greater role done by religious leaders, and there's a great potential there. So the message here is especially for the religious group. So maybe what is missing in our audience today is people who are, very active in religious values, religious teachings. And maybe the next step is to actually bring them into the fold. There has to be a kind of synergy. In Malay language, they talk about the ulama and the umara, the professionals and the theologians coming together in effecting change in society. Next. Yes, from high above, I don't know whether it's 30,000, 40,000, 50,000 feet upstairs. That is already the strong message for United Nations itself that says that saving the earth and its peoples from dangerous climate change is an economic, social, environmental issue and is a moral imperative. But sadly, as been mentioned just now, I'm not being overly dramatic here. Sometimes when you encounter scientists, with due respects, when you mention the word ethics and philosophy, they shy away. They feel that it's not their purview. They feel that when you speak about strong, hard science and technology, there's, ethics is wishy-washy. So again, that's why I speak about empiricizing religious knowledge and empiricizing spirituality. I don't mean that in an irresponsible manner. I don't mean to be irresponsible when I say that, but there is a dire need for people to understand that what religion teaches us, what values teaches us, actually is real out there. I mean, it rings truth in nature. Thanks. Next. Yeah, so the book, whose image we put there, was written in 2007. Professor Michael Northcote, he's a philosopher theologian from University of Edinburgh. He was once a visiting fellow, not once, several times at our center. And he advocates this idea that climate change is a moral issue. And religion deals with morality. And religion has a major role, as we have been saying. And this role is empirically verified, as we've shown. And according to World Survey 2020, hundreds and thousands of respondents across 91 countries do show that religious teachings induces pro-environmental behavior. So we say this over and over again because if it can happen elsewhere, I think it can very easily happen in Malaysia. Why not? We have 6,000 over mosques. I don't have the figures for temples and other houses of worship. But if this is an empirical statement, then what is stopping us? So I just feel that we just have to move faster by increasing our networking and our reach out there. So again, as we've said, religious ability and function is through its ethical teaching. So sometimes when people talk about spirituality in religion, maybe they are pushed away thinking that it's such deep ideas that they may not understand, but basically it's about ethics. And of course, Prof. Osman warned us that there's many types of ethics and we need to be concerned with the quote unquote, when we speak about religious ethics, those that actually come out from the religious books. So potential for the religion in the future solutions, I think is very important. And like we said before this, I think we need after this, MOSTI has to work with other ministries to effect the changes that we want. Next. Okay, this is a book written by, just quite recently, by our colleague Fazlun Khalid. Fazlun Khalid has been to Malaysia many, many times, and he worked with Sahabat Alam Malaysia and Consumer Association, and he's a scientist. He himself put theory to practice by actually starting a community that does what we are preaching here. So his latest book is a kind of good summary of historically, economically, politically, what has happened vis-a-vis the environment. So maybe you're saying that, no, we don't need any more books. We've got the warning. But I'm just saying from the Muslim perspective, which right now I think it's not the time anymore to say, but this is a Muslim view. I'm a Buddhist, I can't take it. This is a Buddhist view. I'm a Muslim, I can't take it. But I think we have now to address each other, like the Earth Charter says. It is our responsibility. We owe it to one another to tell ourselves and the future, like the Red Indian quotation spoken by Professor Mahendran just now. We're talking about the future now. So we have to awaken the great faiths because the threat is real, and we have to put reason to power. I think we can unpack that sentence. We have to put reason to power, especially economic power and political power. Next. Yes, so this is something which personally some of us have been doing that work with directly. So what we're saying is, when we did this declaration, it was done in a very interfaith dialogue kind of manner. So when the declaration was done, it was the preamble talked about, next, the preamble talked about the what and why and how climate change occurs. And then there's the affirmation part, which gives the Islamic view regarding the environment and climate change. And then there is the call for action part, which is how we respond via the so-called Sharia Islamic way, and via living sustainably. And some people may want to refer to the Maqasid Sharia. So we address ourselves. We have a to-do list for everyone, stakeholders, citizens, leaders, governments, corporations. So this declaration is now 5-7 years old, and it was like Dato' I think it was inspired also. It came out around the time that Dato' was on the platform. And for Muslims at least, climate change literacy is public kifayah. It's communally requisite knowledge, which means for Muslims, if someone in the community does not understand it, does not practice what needs to be done vis-a-vis climate change literacy and environmental and behavioral changes, then we are all will be taken to task. So slightly sounding like Ustazah there, but then again, I think we in this audience this afternoon, our audiences differ, Yang Mulia Tengku. We are all not, each one of us talking to the same group of people. So it depends what is your audience, who is your audience. And I really appreciate the fact that economics is coming into the picture, because economics come from the Greek words oikos nomos, how you manage your home. It's related to oikos logos, ecology, understanding your home. So that's what it's all about. You before you manage your home, before you do economics, you have to understand your home, which is ecology, which is science after all. Next. Yes. Again, for fellow friends who are in the sciences, in the technology area, for them it's alien to speak about science and religion coming together. So I just want to remind them that many figures, such as Alfred North Whitehead, who is a mathematician, but who is also a philosopher, he says that the future of humanity depends on the harmonious relationship between the two greatest cultural forces of mankind, which is religion and science. And I think that future is here. Is here and now. I mean, it has been here since the 60s, as Prof. Osman said. And I think before Professor Syed Hussein Nasser's book, Prof. Osman was Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, the lady zoologist, American lady zoologist. She wrote the book Silent Spring. Yeah? So it started in the 60s, but even before that, way back in the 19th century itself, other figures have spoken, and of course everyone is aware of Albert Einstein's thinking about this, where science without religion is lame, religion without science is blind. But again, this is a statement that has to be qualified, because someone will just say, how dare you say religion without science is blind. So this is exactly what the problem is. We need to understand and unpack what science is, what religion is, what has been the problem with the teaching of religion, and what has been the problem with the teaching of science itself. We are all just too eager looking at the technology, and then technology for profits. Okay, and wherein we spoke about beliefs. What are values? Values are beliefs. So what is in trouble now is belief. What do we believe? And this is what we have to come together as Malaysians to draw out the list. Next. We're finishing soon. Again, everybody has heard about Alvin Toffler. He says that the great rapid process of globalization taking place as a result of technology will not lead to sustainability if it's not accompanied by a movement of global ethics at an equally rapid pace. Again, some religious people are upset when we talk about global ethics. They think that some group somewhere is trying to colonize people with a certain kind of ethics. So that is the role of dialogue. So we must be clear what we mean. And for him, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn. What is it that we have to learn? The new things, unlearn and relearn. And as already been mentioned, we need to properly review our mindset, our worldview, which is what it means is how we view nature, how we view ourselves, what meaning we give to life, and all these are translatable into how we govern, manage, work, live, and all that. So I was once in the Faculty of Science somewhere, and some colleagues said to me, Azizan, falsafah is falsampah. So I'm sorry I have to share that, but I don't know whether that was a joke or not. But what is philosophy? Philosophy is asking these questions. Who are you? What are you? Where do you come from? Why are you here? And how should you live whilst you're here? So I think this, at the University of Malaya, we have a department called History Philosophy of Science before, Yang Mulia Tengku is aware. I think we need to revive that kind of curriculum for the science students, and also for the non-science students, especially for the religious students. They have to have some kind of science literacy component in their curriculum. Next. Okay, this is an attempt by some groups. Again, they are looked upon suspiciously by some people, but this effort to sort of harmonize, I'm not saying to equalize, it's to harmonize the SDG goals with the maqasid. What does maqasid means? Objectives of the Sharia. What is the Sharia? The way human beings should live according to values, like Prof. Mahindran says, the religion is teaching us. And so what are these 5 values? Protection of faith, life, intellect, lineage, wealth. So if you look at the 17, some people have done studies and they think that is doable. It's not wrong. Yeah? Again, Yang Mulia Tengku, I'm speaking to those of us in the audience of Muslims who are worried, for example. So jangan risau lah. So what the maqasid, what the SDGs are saying, it's not against your religion. We're not saying it's the same, and they're especially worried about gender equality. So some people get out of that and say kesaksamaan gender, what they call justice. Yeah? So whatever it is, the goal is the same. Yeah? And the 3 types of relationships that we all go through, man to man, man with the creator, and man with the environment, all of that has to be governized and has to be looked at in a very harmonious way. Next. So the urgency is for us to make sure that literacy on the causes of climate change and its impact, that has to be done, without wasting any time. Because recently when we had the major floods, the newscasters were trying to talk about low pressure areas and all that, but it was not explained in a manner that made people understand. People kept on asking the question, why did this happen? Why weren't the warnings good enough and all that? So until when are you going to blame the departments that are in charge for the things that are happening in nature? When every single one of us should actually understand, at least minimally, how it happened and how we actually contribute to the problem. So, and there is also a need for a new language that will harmonize scientific and religious knowledge. We talked about this, with practical actions coming out of that harmonizations, and that we, from henceforth, we will not only be talking about mitigations only, that we can be talking about, taking steps to prevent, for example. And then, the media, I think, can afford to be brought in a bit more. And I think people need to be literate, especially in the media. We say this with the greatest respect to everyone. So one example of common language, new narrative we're talking about, if you're a Muslim, there is this ayat in the Quran, there's so many other ayats, it says corruption has appeared on land and sea because of what people's hands have wrought, that he may make them taste or experience and understand a part of what they have done so that they may return. The word tawbah can be unpacked. It is going back to respecting nature, to respecting the limits. So this is the kind of tadabbur that I think people should encourage in religious classes. Thank you. Is there one more? Yeah, well, this is just the same idea being presented to you. If Maslow's hierarchy can be seen to be something that makes sense and logical, beginning with the most basic needs, then I think those people who are alien to the concept of the Maqasid Sharia can see that there are similarities in the thinking here. So this is just another example of the new narrative we're talking about. Yeah. Next. Last but not least, we've seen some ministries making efforts at harmonizing religious principles with practical actions. This concept Waqaf Air, I think you know about this. So this is religious value in action, if you want. But there isn't much explanation as to what is Waqaf, and even spiritually, what is a Waqaf? It's not being explained properly to people. So and the impact, I think, would have been better. Next. So that's it, Yang Mulia Tengku. The list can go on there in terms of the networking, in terms of who can help who. I think this webinar this afternoon is a tremendous effort, and we especially congratulate and thank the ASM, and we will be behind you in whatever small ways that we can. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You have done a lot of work for several decades now in and of course in IKIM. Perhaps when we come to the Q&A, you can expand a little bit on how you actually build bridges. Certainly we need to collaborate, to interact, to partner, but how do you actually get it done across religious systems of belief?
Yeah.
But let's do that later. So now, with great pleasure, let's invite Professor Dr. Yu Hong Tat to make his presentation. Professor Yu, are you there? Yeah.
Okay, thank you to Yang Mulia Tengku, the chairperson, for this forum, and then also to our president of ASM and also the panelists. I'd like to share with you today in maybe from a different perspective, but I still hope that how we can connect the science and spirituality. Now, we always think that how we are connected to the nature and even to the universe. So I like to actually always raise this example. Just imagine the sunlight outside our window. Just imagine that about 8 minutes ago, all the photons just left the sun surface and then come to Earth. So this is how we are actually connected to the nature, to the universe. So by realizing of this one, it's very important that although we know that from physical laws, we have these cause, effects, and conditions, that actually we can see how the universe, how the Earth, how the human society, and how us, we grow, we develop, and all that. But all these are actually, as science may put it, that according to the scientific knowledge and all that, we know how it works and all that through all these cause, effect, and conditions. Okay, and also occasionally we also faced with this large effect, or what we call black swan effect and uncertainty. Black swan effect is referring to those incidents that are unlikely to happen, but it happen will bring great impact, just like this COVID-19 actually pandemic. Okay, so by knowing this one, we can start seeing that whatever, like say, as we live on the earth, it's not certain, not sustainable if we don't actually preserve it properly, we don't take care of it. Okay, so that's why understanding this impermanence, the threshold of life when things go well, and contemplating impermanence, we live with hope when life is difficult, that there is still possibility to change it. If we actually together make an effort to help to actually make the earth more sustainable. Now, as we know that from history of Earth and all, there have been these 5 major mass extinctions of species and all that. Okay, and we hope that I think the human, whatever damage caused by human, will not bring the next mass extinction event. But now, considering the planetary health, we may be actually creating something that may harm human species on our own. So this is something that we need to actually take action on. Okay. Now we look at the global challenges. We can see that climate change, biodiversity loss, and now with the challenges of artificial intelligence, that we are talking about whether in future we do have some control about the artificial intelligence. environmental disasters, nuclear threats, biotechnology risks, as well as pandemic. So by knowing all these kind of global challenges, okay, we start realizing that in fact more of such events are actually coming to us. Like for example, you look at this pandemic and all that, we can see that in recent history of mankind, there have been actually much more frequent occurrence of this one. So does that mean that even after COVID, that maybe more will be coming because of our actually disturbance of that we have caused to the nature, or because also of the climate change or other natural disasters that we have actually broken the balance on the Earth system. Now, Professor Max Tegmark of MIT actually like to share his actually view of it in terms of life. He say that there are actually now what we call on Earth two different life systems. One is life 1.0, all those species that they transfer their knowledge through gene, I mean from generation to generation, just like COVID-19 virus. And that is this a human being who are actually living in life 2.0 because we have languages, we have education. So during our lifetime, we'll be able to transfer knowledge to our next generations so that they can continue to improve on this one. That's why we see a lot of innovation and great actually achievements in science and technology. Okay, and slowly because now we have created another world, which is the digital world that we are entering this life 2.1, that more and more people are spending more time in this digital human world and social media. Okay, then of course he also mentioned about future life 3.0, superhuman, where we can, even with the technology advances and all, we can even actually change our organs and have a lot more power in terms of given by these technologies and science. And of course, the intelligent AI robots that may actually come up and to actually assist or to compete with the human being. So if we look at the evolution of human society from primitive time, agricultural, industrial, until now ICT and internet and future robotic and intelligence and all that, we can see that there has been a lot of advancements of science and technology that help us to improve our life, okay? But at the same time, if you look at it, at different times of this human evolution, there are still actually a lot of mental challenges we have, hatred, a lot of problems and emotional challenges and all that. So it seems that we are still not able to actually address this. And of course, about how we actually treat the earth, how we actually treat the nature, okay? And with advancements of technology and all that, in fact, the damages we are causing every day may be actually more than in the past few generations. So, and as you move on to the virtual world, as now we can see more and more, especially our younger generation, spending more of the time in the virtual world. Okay, so we are now creating at a second world, second human world that the people are spending more time on this one. And in this case, we may actually forget about that we are still physically on Earth, that we need to actually help to actually restore or preserve this planetary health. By knowing of this one, as mentioned by the famous author Thomas Friedman, who wrote this, "The World is Flat," and now in his more recent book, "Thank You for Being Late," he's trying to rethink about what he has mentioned before. He's trying to suggest that even for STEM education, we should put in the human values, STEM faculty, so that we start thinking about beyond the science, but also about human values, about spirituality, about what we should actually contribute back to the nature. Now, if you look at the intelligent robots, as you can see that even during the pandemic time, the improvements, advancements of this technology has actually continued. Okay, and we are even talking about swarm of robots in future that will totally change how we live and all that. But at the same time, there will also be challenges, AI and robots. We are faced with the uncertain future, not only the Earth itself, or not only the climate change and all that, we are also uncertain about the jobs available, the kind of lifestyle we're going to have, and slowly, without we understanding about the nature, while we are actually in the social media or internet, more and more people are actually influenced without their actually realizing about all this algorithm-driven world, where slowly the algorithms built inside the social media are also changing our mind, changing about how we actually view about nature, how we view about human society, how we view about the earth. Okay, so by knowing all this one, in order to connect science and spirituality, we find out that it's important for us to bring back our awareness, the general awareness of everybody. Before we do something, we think about the impact, we think about other things as well. Because currently, as mentioned by Professor Richard Davidson, who is actually one of the 100 most influential people in the world, as actually mentioned by Time Magazine in 2006. He said that the modern society are facing these 4 challenges. Distractibility. We are easy to actually distract in terms of our attention. Okay, so in this case, we feel loneliness, we have a lot of negative self-talk and depression, and loss of meaning and purpose in life. Okay, so in this case, when we are actually heading towards the future world, with the generations we are uncertain, the generations which are actually easily losing their focus and all that, it is important for us to bring them back to the spirituality side of it, so that they understand the human society, they understand the science, they understand how these are actually interconnected. Okay, we are always distracted by many things, but how many times we pay attention to bring back our own attention, okay, and how to actually often we remember to call our inner self. So in this case, this issue of planetary health, we need to actually bring it to the attention and awareness of many people, including from the young kids until the adults and until actually senior people as well. Now, the author of the Emotional Intelligence, the book, Daniel Goleman, actually later also wrote another very important book. That was the time when actually digitalization, mobile phones become actually very popular. He mentioned about focus. He noticed that this generation, the new generations and all, we are losing, or we together are losing this focus about inner self, about others, about outer. So that includes our awareness about the health, the planetary health, the climate change and all that. Sometimes even with the report of all this climate change and other things and all that, they will just take note and then quickly shift to other thing or not, and not realizing this kind of awareness. Okay, and then there was also this research by Harvard professors, these 2 professors, that in fact a lot of time what is creating this kind of a world without their focus back to what is important for our future is this wandering mind. A lot of people are now actually, while doing their work, may not be focusing on what they are doing. And then with this wandering mind, they are not happy. And of course, they are creating a lot also challenges and problems as well. Okay, so with this in mind, we think that to address this issue and also to connect something, okay, with science and spirituality, okay, maybe when we actually, we need to have these 2 essential skills. One is adaptively to outside change. Okay, for example, we can use the scientific knowledge and technology to actually help us to adapt to all kinds of changes outside. Okay, but at the same time, we also need to have this inner mind tranquility. Okay, so that you help us to govern, help us to actually direct us to know that what kind of changes we should make, what kind of action we should do, and to protect the earth better, to actually preserve a better heritage, and to help the human world and all that to continue be sustainable. So we think that these are the 2 essential skills in this modern world. And these 2 essential skills, in fact, if you look at it, the ability to outside change needs focused mind to learn and handle. And the inner mind tranquility needs peaceful mind to actually practice and keep. And this focused mind and peaceful mind, just like, for example, when we actually do whatever work we do, scientific work and whatever thing and all that, we need to be focused. We need to learn new ways of actually bring back the intentions of the human being. But at the same time, through spirituality, you actually maintain us with a peaceful mind so that we are able to actually handle the outside problems with a better focused mind. Okay, so Professor Daniel Kahneman, the famous Nobel Prize winner, actually has actually written this book, Thinking Fast and Slow. Okay, in order to have this mind change, okay, he believed that he inside his book he said that basically in our thinking process, in our brain there are these two systems, 1 and system 2. System 1 is basically based on whatever neural network, neuron network connection we already have. So a lot of time when we think about this one, we just actually react it spontaneously. Whereas the system 2, we use our logical mind to think about it before we make any decisions and all that. So the same things, when we are actually facing with this global challenge of planetary health and climate change, and when we observe all these kind of change coming and all that, how to raise this awareness and bring back their attention is actually through more education, awareness campaign, and all kinds of activity to actually help them to actually reshape what is in their actually neural network so that they appreciate natural well and the environment better, and also know the connections between science and spirituality. Okay, so sometimes I was thinking that maybe living in this challenging time and all that, we can actually practice together with this simple step. While living, working, or doing, be mindful and live at present. And we know that everything is changing and interdependent, and it is also possible. Okay, anything can happen when the condition is right, but try to face it where anything happens. Use our scientific knowledge, use our technology to go and solve the problem. But at the same time, while we are adapting ourselves to outside change, we need the spirituality part of it to maintain our inner mind tranquility, and then be grateful and send loving kindness. So with this kind of thing, we'll be able to actually see a common ground, how we can connect science and spirituality together. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Yu. While listening to you, I could almost describe you as a spiritual scientist. You have gone through a big survey of scientific literature in the last few years. Many of these books are quite familiar to some of us. Certainly, these are very important, maybe scientific findings. Ultimately, of course, whether they touch our hearts is another matter. So let's come to the question and answer session. I would like, if I may, take the first question from myself. To ask all the panel members this one common thread. There are several common threads in the discussion, but I think the most common of all is actually the need to actually change mindsets and attitudes. And of course, not everybody believes in the importance of spirituality in addressing the climate change or the planetary health problem. So the question is this: how could we actually approach the different kinds of people that we are very important? They are the role players in tackling this huge crisis. How do we approach each one of them in a way that can bring out the common ground? Anyone wants to start? Maybe Professor Osman, can you offer something there as a starting point? It's how to deal with people.
Well, yes. If we make our starting point the concern on how to address the urgent problems now affecting planetary health, is the issue of we human beings are demanding, making material demand on in terms of the use of material resources, and therefore we should address the people who are everywhere in the world who are concerned with development, precisely. That's why I think the issue of planetary health depends on our attitudes, our approaches to the use of natural resources, which means the people who are concerned with development. I think as far as what spirituality can contribute in this area is precisely to moderate our demands, our needs from the natural world. Perhaps part of our problem is because we go the quick way, want to have the quickness, the fast way to riches, to prosperity, and so on. But we are not prepared to be patient in terms of we should look for integrated, holistic approaches to development. All right. So when I saw the image from Professor Mahendran about fishing, the traditional fishing and the fishing bird, that reminds of my young days when I was, for a long time in our kampong. We were happy to have the traditional way of fishing, the fresh fish, all right? Then suddenly, one guy in the kampong decided to buy this bomb, this bomb petrol, and it polluted the river. The method polluted the river, even polluted the fish. The fish was not as good as So that is a very simple example. What has happened? Basically, we want the fast way. Segera, everything segera, but segera which is in a damaging way. Can give a lot of examples, but if we generalize the issue, and this emphasized in the limits to growth, all right? We cannot, planetary health cannot be attained unless we impose limit on ourselves, which means that we have to deal with self-management. And there's also a place where spirituality can teach us a lot how to enable ourselves to limit, to observe, to discipline, self-discipline. Of course, it's not easy, because it's a question of individual choice. But the other one is to impose limit on the material production with the view of attaining global equilibrium. So this is another issue, I think, which science and spirituality can work together. How, in practice, to realize this concept of ecological balance, both on the macro scale as well as on the micro scale. Within in our country, in Malaysia, for example, somebody can come up with that. Say organic farming. It was good that introduced organic farming what people in our country have done for hundreds of years, But what we need to do is we organize that on a grander scale, on bigger scale, how to have organic farming in the sense that it accords with the spiritual values. The spiritual values of nature that has been taught in the literature. And that's my response.
Teguh, can I comment?
Yes, of course. I was going to come to you at some stage because this idea of growth forever is being questioned right now. So there could be slower growth, there could be no growth, just a very stable economy. Perhaps you can comment on that later, but for now, please continue with your current intervention.
Yeah, I think the big challenge that we have is there are two folds. One is actually we have this notion of profit maximization and shareholder value. Okay. And our shareholder value is very small shareholder, that is the people that invest. I think we need to transition from that profit maximization to purpose maximization, where our shareholders are much more broader. The shareholders are not just people who invest, but actually people who are living, the communities, a much more higher shareholder. So that requires the way we train our CEOs. the people that manage our companies. The CEOs are chief executive officers. It should be chief enlightenment officer. That's the CEO. If you're not enlightened, you have no executive powers or anything. So I think we need to change that mindset, that CEO and our chief ecological officers. That's one area. I think we need to, and we are starting to see that in many European countries where the CEOs are actually chief enlightenment officers. They are actually seeing the ecology shareholder value from a much more broader perspective. That's number one. Number two, on the spiritual side, religiosity doesn't mean spirituality. I think, we tend to get confused with religiosity and spirituality. I think spiritual people understand religious values better. And what we have is, I think, as scientists, we can call spade a spade, a lot of religious institutions tend to be very dogmatic in their belief systems, and I think this is where we need to have enlightened people within the organization that have more introspective, contemplative, reflective, and perhaps even spiritualists. The person who discovered the Big Bang theory, the Big Bang was a Jesuit priest. A Jesuit priest who was thinking exactly like what Prof. You were saying, that bringing the spiritual values, the universe, the science, bringing that together. And I think we need to see how we train our CEOs, our spiritual organizations. When I say institution, it's institutional leadership and stewardship, and how we train them to have a more comprehensive and universal outlook. Thank you.
What about the other panel members? No? Professor, you? Yes? You have something?
No, but because of this, I think I would like to echo in terms of actually, for example, all these kind of values. We also notice that, for example, our students, like for example, now even for engineering students, when they were asked to actually design the project and all that, in the past, many years ago, it used to be that they had to come up with the engineering designs that is actually good economically and also functionally and those kind of things. But now we normally they have to make sure that socially, environmentally, and all that aspects be considered. And with that kind of thing, we can really see that not only the creativity of them has increased, but right from the beginning, when they are actually taught about designing and working on this, they have already have this in mind, with environment, with social, with everything in mind. I think that is something that we can do something starting from that.
Okay. I have a question coming from the participants that's posted here, which may impinge on the same sort of issue. The question is, how do we actually address people who have anti-science views? They command respect in certain movements. You're talking about the flat earth people and anti-vaxxers, etc. How do you actually address these people? They're part of the community, and if you don't address them, they will be, I would say, the outlier that can cause a lot of problem, because they refuse to understand what science has already made very clear. To us, it's so obvious, but to them, it's not obvious. The anti-vaxxer movement is very strong, and where it comes from, I cannot understand, because most of them are not scientists, but some are actually scientists. Any views? Professor Osman, you have to unmute.
Yes.
Yeah.
There are so many things going on under the name of religiosity, under the name of spirituality. All right, there are a lot of currents under that name. I think we must be more modest. I think if you want to go further, to move ahead, then we have to limit our understanding, what we mean by spirituality. Because now we are having a dialogue between science and spirituality. And therefore, we are concerned, for example, we should ask ourselves, in science, what do you want to achieve? You would like to see creativity, innovation, literacy, the advancement of our knowledge under what we call science. Now, there are currents of spirituality, what I call, some people may know the word, but I call it intellectual spirituality, or philosophical spirituality, or epistemological spirituality. In other words, those aspects of spirituality, we share a common thing with science in terms of how to arrive at more knowledge, how to to go for interdisciplinary knowledge and so on. Therefore, we are concerned with epistemology, the issues related to knowledge, both how to discover new knowledge and how to apply that knowledge in an ethical way. This is our immediate concern. To bring science and spirituality to deal with these issues, and therefore we are not concerned. Of course, there are many people who are anti-science, people or religious people, but just as there are people among the scientific community who are anti-spirituality without really understanding what spirituality is. So that is what we are facing right now. As I think the modest effort that I'm doing now precisely should be to come to commonalities, more than anything else, between science and spirituality. I certainly subscribe to that view. I'm interested in the spirituality that, in terms of content, deal with cosmology, deal with psychology, deal with especially cognitive psychology. There are philosophies of spirituality which talk about creativity in sense. So creativity is also an issue with which philosophers, theologians, and spiritual authorities are concerned with. And that is still a very, very broad field that we need to discuss, to debate, and to come to common terms. Thank you.
Tengku, can I ask? Can I address your question on whether the economy can grow perpetually?
Can I now add to that before you answer? There is a strong movement right now to actually reformulate the GDP, as you know. All right? GDP is a very poor measure of what development means. Now they're trying to expand it in a way that actually encompasses various things. For example, the value of ecosystem services, etc., etc. I think you know that. I don't want to repeat. So can you also include that part of it? There can be no growth or slow growth, or I would manage balanced growth, whatever you want to call it. There's so many names. But also at the same time is how to measure things. I want to quote from another Nature editorial, by the way. Very interesting, just a few words. What we measure, we value. And what we value, we manage. Maybe that's a good way to start.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very, very good point. You see, I think the whole idea of can the economy grow perpetually?
Yeah.
The answer is actually, if you see, if we use the traditional levers of the economy, your land, labor, and capital, we hit a diminishing return. And this is the problem, that we are using the land in an unproductive way. There is this notion in economics, which, you see like people like Schumpeter and Paul Romer talks about increasing returns to scale. So what that means is that for every input you put in, you have more output. So you do more with less. And what that means is that today the economy enables you to do this, all this Industry 4.0 and the various AI kind of systems that are in, you can get better value if you deploy it properly. So this is what we call the endogenous growth theory. And we are seeing that smaller countries are able to capture wider spillover impact. So this is where, through this technology, this is where science plays an important role. This endogenous growth theory where you get increasing returns, you get better economies of scale, scope, and network externalities. That's why you see Singapore is right on top in terms of the competitiveness and all, because they're able to deploy Finland and others, right? So the whole idea is that today science enables us to measure the intangibles, right? And so And this is where if you deploy the science and technology, you can measure the value of a tree, and you incorporate that into your pricing. You incorporate that in all your business practices. And that's why you pay more for your gasoline in Europe. So people are willing to pay for that value. So we see that the GDP is going to transform over time as GVP, the value that we create from the intangibles. So this whole notion of intangible economies are starting to become more and more stronger. And I think that requires science, technology, innovation, and rethinking our economic system. And that's why I think the 12th Malaysia Plan already has the blueprints in there. What we need is an ecosystem that builds that value-based economic development. We are moving in the direction. We are starting to see a lot of the tariffs coming in on the intangibles, on the pollution, and so on. And countries like developing countries that don't adhere to this are going to pay a higher price.
So when we say we want to have a chief enlightened officers, it also means a practical way. In a practical way, they have to learn the new ways of measuring their performance. And that cannot continue on the current basis. So sometimes that practical approach may work better than some of the more, I'll call it, philosophical approaches. It's very practical. We are going to measure it this way. And your performance is actually going to be seen by everybody on earth in the open society.
And the 8R measures that. That's what the 8R captures, that value of intangibles.
Okay. So I hope our participants are listening to all this, and please forward your other questions as we move along, because there are many subsidiary issues that are spinning out. I have one question I think quite interesting, and I want to read it because it's quite a long statement. I don't want to summarize it. It's from somebody calling himself Dr. H. One key message emerges from all science and spirituality need to be considered together. Very true, and we all agree. Yet, as pointed out, the renowned Islamic scholar and scientist Dr. Syed Hussein Nasser eloquently and forcefully highlighted the issues of the coming crisis long time back due to the lack of disconnection. Yet, as a civilization, we have continued to fail thanks to dominance of amoral positions that we have adopted. Amoral, we don't care about morality. So my question, first, how should we get traction to change this worldview or position? And second, how to enact real change at the ground level? We can take both questions or just one. Any panel members? He's saying that we must see the two sides simultaneously. You have to unmute, Professor. Yes.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
I agree. I mean, we should look at things the holistic way. In other words, don't ignore, don't ignore any element, any aspect or something. I think that is a very, very wise thing. Yeah, to look at everything from various angles, especially the important things. And now we're dealing with nature, basically, with the natural world. What is our perception of the natural world, from which we want to gain many things? Yeah? We expect to have many things, but how should we treat? How should we view nature itself? And I'm arguing that science by itself will not be able to get that whole picture of nature. Science is very good in gaining information about certain aspects of the nature. But you know very well in the history of modern science, assumptions have been made, the premises that have been made that, well, the only reality of nature is that which we can measure according to some defined, what we call the scientific method and so on. But there have been many critiques of that view. Yeah, nature has been reduced to certain reality, and we think that is nature. But in the process of reduction, we have impoverished the world of nature itself. Now, of course, in the science, there are many elements in science trying to reverse that position. I think Professor Mahendra mentioned that, all right? Many groups in the West today are studying phenomena which decades ago the scientists say, no, that's none of our business. That's not scientific domain. So in other words, we welcome that new development in which scientists are widening the net of their scientific research, so that intangibles also, right? The study of intangibles. After all, particle physics, quantum physics, study phenomena which we do not observe that in a physical way. All right. So I think, to me, the issue of ecology. Ecology is the subject. What is actually the ecological relationship that exists in the world of nature and the human world? Have we found the last, have we found the result? I mean, have we really arrived at the last word on the subject? No, it's just the beginning. I think the subject of ecology, integral ecology, in which the human world interacts with the biophysical world, we know little already. We know something already, thanks to the subject of ecology, environmental studies, but much more needs to be done. We need to understand better what is really the secret in the relationship between the human world and the natural world.
Other panel members?
Can I comment on this?
Yeah, sure.
Immoral position.
Immoral
I think this is a
position.
very important point.
Yes.
I think this notion of immoral position, as what I see is that I think we come into that position when we stop questioning or challenging the norms. If we just took for granted the Newtonian mechanics and said that is the real truth and not push the boundaries, we would not have discovered, relativity and quarks and everything else. And I think to some extent, we see a sense of, the immoral position is we take things dogmatically, and that is where we stop learning. We don't push the boundaries. And I think this is the key challenge that we see in many cases, that we don't push the boundaries of knowledge to seek the truth. That is why we see that the true spiritualist is actually a seeker of truth. And the scientist is essentially also a seeker of truth. One is of material truth, the other one is on a subjective truth. So when you have both a scientist who's a spiritualist, they combine both the subjective and the objective, and they have better understanding of this universe better. That is why you see that the discovery of the Big Bang and discovery of many things happen from a spiritual perspective, but has got major impact to society. So again, I think we should not stop learning. We should ask a lot of questions like what scientists do, never take things for granted, and ultimately the truth will reveal itself. Unfortunately, we don't see that in some quarters. And this is where we have the immoral. So people take a functional approach as opposed to a more deeper, introspective, and a more, purposeful approach. We don't get a chief enlightenment officer.
Anyway, I think Thomas Kuhn's idea of paradigmatic change, I think, is very relevant in this discussion, because we see so many anomalies now. But many of the scientists perhaps are not willing to accept those as anomalies. They sort of explain the problems away. They just don't want to recognize. Until, of course, the anomalies become so big, as big elephant sitting in front of them, then there's no other way. So it means that it's always the minority that actually takes on the job of dealing with the anomalies. Because these are the people who actually recognize these anomalies for what they are. They are no longer true descriptions of reality. So maybe I stop there. I want to hear from you. Yeah, Professor Azan, yes, of course.
Yeah, just a small point. I think there's also the issue still of the compartmentalization of knowledge.
Sure.
Very often people think that it's their field that's the most important. It's a lifetime observation on my part. and it's not a habit that you want to be reading about other areas besides your own. Second point I want to make is the separation between the natural sciences and the hard sciences from the so-called social humanitarian sciences. I think this is a very serious issue. In today's world, we cannot solve problems via just science technology. After all, STEM has evolved into stream. The R being religion or the A being arts. So I think we should take the message from there and do something different in Malaysia like we once shared with us. Thank you.
If I may, we are coming to the end of the session. So I think the one good way of closing this very hot discussion is to go back to the idea of a program of action. Professor Osman actually proposed a number of ideas. I'm sure other panel members also have their own ideas. But let's just look at Professor Osman's first. I will ask Professor Osman to perhaps, do you want to highlight some of these points? What is it that we can actually get done on the ground? And I think many of us are concerned about the future generations, the younger generations who will inherit the earth. And of course, Professor Mahendran quoted from the natives of America, we are actually borrowing from our children. We are using something that doesn't belong to us, it belongs to them. Professor Osman, yeah?
Well, all the proposals that I have presented are important, and of course different in terms of implementing it, putting it into implementation and action. It involves different people. But since we are concerned about the place and role of spirituality in the pursuit of planetary health, the first one, I think the common ground, establishing the common ground between the Malaysia spiritual tradition can be achieved at different levels. At the level of for education, for example, certainly in education on the what they call environmental education, ecological education, we should start bringing in the teachings, the doctrines from the spiritual tradition. I'm talking about the common values. That has also many benefits. We in Malaysia are working, ongoing effort to bring about unity among Malaysians. So in the past, we had different policy. First, that all religion or spirituality is a sensitive thing. I agree with what Professor Mahendran. All right, I think the word spirituality is less, less sensitive compared to religiosity. Right? So it is important using all platforms, both formal education and public education, these common values, the common spiritual values pertaining to nature. Because here we're talking about nature. It's about spirit, but at least we begin there. We share a common concern with the planet Earth. So we adopt a common universal approach to spiritual education and programs in dealing in how to maintain our natural environment in the best possible health as possible. So to me, it's very, very important. Bringing in issues of faith, issues of spirituality into this problem, and since there's so many common ideas, why not we implement those ideas?
Very simple. Thank you. Other panel members, what do you think?
Can I add, Tengku? I think adding on to Prof. Osman's, narrative earlier. I think, that common spiritual values and truth, as I said, the 6 steps, that's the first step, is getting the common spiritual values and truth. But I think we need to tease that out into core values that is practicable. And this is where we see that 8R is really important. The second aspect is that, the ecosystem, we've heard this term called metaverse. Actually, what we are seeing is meta ecosystems. We've got a religious ecosystem, we've got a spiritual, we've got local communities, a whole range of meta ecosystems that we need to have a simple framework that binds that together. The DNA is common, but you have multiple different ecosystems that we need to weave. We need to be able to measure it as scientists, the impact, right? Both the tangible and intangible. This is where we tease out the return on value, both economic, environment, social, and political. And once we are able to create that value, we've got to reinforce that back to the value systems that we build in our society. I think without that entire integrated approach, a fragmented approach will not get us anywhere. It has not got anywhere, including the war in Europe at the present moment. So I think this is a major challenge for humanity. Thank you.
Well, I think what is coming through from this discussion is that to avoid a fragmented approach, we need to be able to communicate using better language. One of the terms that we have to avoid is religiosity, perhaps. We are not talking about religion as such. We are talking about human values that are common among different belief systems, right? And this is what spirituality implies for us. Okay, Professor Osman, I think, mentioned that very well. But I want also to talk about a little bit about how we actually enact the narration. The narrative has to change, and this is Professor Azizah. Maybe you want to comment on that. I'm coming to the close now. I'm getting signals that we have to close now, but I want to hear from all members, Professor Azan, and then Professor Yu, please. So Azan
I think
first.
the issue of new narrative yang boleh tentu is crucial, especially for the younger generation. When you teach religion, far too often, I think the traditional way is that you tell people the do's and don'ts. You hardly say the why, right? So I think to begin with, you need the compassion element, the empathy element, the human element. But then again, people very quickly will add on the isms and then call you a humanism person. So I think something needs to be done about teaching religion, the teaching of religion. I mean, again, unpack the word religion, please. From the Latin word religare, being bounded to something, right? Prof. Mahindaran, explicates these values. Values are beliefs that you hold on to. But what the young people need to be told is why do you need to hang on to those values? Why must not you throw plastic bottles in the water, in the longkang? Why? Because this is what's going to happen. Is that a dosa, which is a Sanskrit word, which means injustice? So for me, traditional teaching vis-a-vis spirituality or religion can take place, no problems, yeah. But the new narrative must add on to the explanations, when and where necessary, when and where suitable. I'm not advocating that we have a uniform method for all audiences. That will not be possible. But another thing is, I think religion sometimes is not being manifested in the ethics of people, in the behavior of people. Sorry to say, people do religious things because they want to run after nirvana or shurga, which is fine, right? But little do they realize that what they actually do is actually being recorded, is actually matters. So what I am saying here is that you cannot sort of lay back and just let things be as they are, because already we have reports of people leaving religions, which is a taboo topic to begin with. So why do you do that? Because they are not allowed to ask, they're not allowed to understand. So I think the key word is understanding lah. So I think
what you used earlier, unlearning.
Unlearn, relearn.
Yes.
Learn, unlearn, and relearn. Yes. Yeah, that's right. Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, Professor Yu, last words.
Okay. I think that I also strongly believe that in our education system, we have to actually bring bring back or strengthen these human values, sharing of this one from the very beginning. Because this is from there and from whatever curriculum and even from the hidden curricula that they actually learn and then they appreciate these human values. And the other thing is actually also we have to see that in the digitalization, and we now have this digital world. And in digital world, although in the normal curriculum in the physical world we have some curriculum to be taught to them and all that, but in the digital world we still do not have something which is useful and which is actually that we can actually work together so that the generations of the youth and all that, they can continue to get the right value of the human value. I think this is our challenge.
Thank you. I will not try to summarize. We've had a lot of interesting discussion here, and I don't think we use very hard words, no philosophical buzzwords. They are all simple words that anybody can understand. So the next step is for us to bring together the most important ideas and see how we can operationalize them. So I really want to stop at this point by really thanking our scene setter, Professor Osman, all panel members, Professor Mahendran, Professor Azizan, and Professor Yu, for your most valuable contributions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So back to the Secretariat. Is there any last words from Secretariat? Is that it? Is Nazmi coming back?
Thank you, Tengku Dato' Dr. Azman, for adeptly steering the discussion just now.
Okay.
Dear esteemed panelists, thank you for enlightening us on the roles of science and spirituality and how these can be amalgamated to achieve optimal planetary health. To our members of the audience, I hope you are better informed on planetary health and how we, as custodians of the environment, can play our part in achieving it. Also, thank you for your questions and feedback on the subject matter. Members of the audience, the crisis confronting humanity right now is inherently multidimensional. At the epistemological level, science and spirituality are closely related. Planetary health will be better served if this inherent intimate relationship is applied to solve this major contemporary human challenge. By actively protecting and preserving our environment, we would be able to create a competitive and innovative economic ecosystem that would help us achieve a prosperous, inclusive, and sustainable Malaysia. Now we have reached the end of the 36th ASM ideaXchange. For more science-based programs, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram Academy Science Malaysia. Also, don't forget to watch ASM and MOSTI's virtual spaces for the launching of Minggu Sains Negara on 1st of April 2022. With that, I am your MC, Nazmi, signing off with a reminder for everyone to wear a mask when you are out and about, practice physical distancing, and to please take your booster shot. Think science, celebrate technology, inspire innovation. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you all. Assalamualaikum. Good afternoon.
Yeah, thank you to all the panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.